Every year, Hamilton Native Outpost has a field day to share knowledge of native plants. Colt is talking about the creation and benefits of a diverse native silvopasture, which is also called a savanna. This field day focused on grazing diverse native grasslands with livestock, but the information presented here can be useful to anyone interested in creating savannas. Colt is manager of Hamilton Native Outpost. In the video description, check out other videos from the field day. We join Colt as he is standing in a diverse native silvopasture and starts talking about the plants around him.
There. But here you mostly got the cool season rye, and this one it's not as early of a rye as that early McGregor rye or other wild rye he's talking about. It'll head out a little bit later. But it's interesting that McGregor rye, I don't see one right here, that he was talking about, it really matches the growth of the trees and their leaves pretty close, and that in the spring it hits it's going to make seed and die about June, about the time the leaves gets full seed on. And when I say die, it just goes dormant. It's a perennial plant. It's going to come back, but it won't green back up till October, till the leaves fall off trees. Then it starts to green back up, does its thing over winter, makes seed again, and goes dormant again about June. And there's a lot of examples of how plants fit that growth of what's growing around them. Like they do out there, it can do the same in here. This was planted 4 years ago, this particular patch, and hand seeded on. And we try to graze. You get a lot of brush coming back in here. There's a stump up here that's sprouting back. There's some blackberries there behind him, different things. So we try to burn these roughly every 3 to 5 years. We'll try to burn them off to set that brush back. If you can burn, it don't matter if that's that big around, that brush, if you can burn it hot enough at the bottom, it'll have to come back from the ground. The top part will die. The root system stays there, but it takes it a while to get caught back up to where it was, another 4 to 5 years. So by burning it, that year we generally hold the cattle off a little bit more on the last graze on it to give us fuel for the fire. And then the leaves on the trees as they fall over winter gives you the fuel for that burn. Otherwise, we'll graze this. We haven't grazed this yet this year, have we, Dad?
Always here in March.
So we grazed this March. It wasn't a lot, going on. Didn't affect what you see a lot. And it's ready to be grazed. You might as well be coming through and biting about half of that off if you wanted to. I think the goal here is actually to let it make quite a bit of seed this year, but just kind of thicken up our rye, get us a little bit more. I was impressed, Justin was saying that a lot of times in the woods, and there's fairly dense woods over there, you find places where you put your square down and there's nothing in that. It'd be hard to find a spot out here, so we feel like from a grazing standpoint, we're being way more productive out here. And we should have probably logged this site instead of girdling it. At the time, logs were fairly cheap, so we just went ahead and girdled it and saved from having the big equipment in here. We just kind of hurried to get it planted and do stuff. But right now, logs are pretty high, and a person can pay more than make the money on their seed back by logging it and then planting it back to diverse natives. Virtually doesn't cost your farming operation anything. And selective logging is another good practice to use. You don't have to take the best. We like to get at least 50% sunshine hitting the ground as a kind of minimum. The more sunlight you get hitting the ground, the more productive it is. I would say that field's a little more productive on tonnage than up in here, but it's getting more sunlight. If we cleared this, we could make it look like that too, but that's not our goal here. So anyways, that's kind of what we're doing. Let's see, discovered the burning. There's some other tips in there kind of talking about different trees, and as you clear it, what you're kind of looking for. And if you take the trees that look kind of like, I think she calls it a broccoli sprout, and they're just a long narrow stem with a top, they've grown in a lot of competition, and if they're very old, they'll never come out of that, and then they get real susceptible to wind. But if you notice, a lot of these have branches coming out of the main trunk lower down. Since we've opened it up, there's more sunlight down low. They're starting to spread their leaves back out down lower. But I think a lot of our woodlands on a lot of our operations are real underutilized. We're not really getting much value. The logs, there's some value in logs, but they're long time to regenerate. A lot of our slopes and our rockier places aren't conducive to growing multiple crops of timber very quickly. And we think we can probably grow as healthy of logs and forage at the same time by thinning it down. We're getting a lot more nutrient cycling, like they've been talking about, different things using our woodland. And it's quite a bit. I noticed we got I'd like to have been up that night and see how hard it did rain. I know that the rain gauge said we didn't get all that much, but it really washed. That creek really come up there. And that hillside over there that's primarily trees, it really washed down that hillside and moved a lot of the leaves around. This here with the grass in it, even in the draws and the ditches that come down, you couldn't hardly tell it run any water. You know, it just had a lot more water infiltration, a lot more plant material to stop it. The leaves kind of act like shingles and fall one on top of the other, and your rain doesn't get to your soil. It just runs from leaf to leaf to leaf, heading downhill. So that's I think we could do a lot to improve our landscape just by using our woodlands that we don't utilize for much of anything. And I like woods. I like to hunt and fish and do all that stuff, but to me this is enjoyable as the dense wood with nothing but trees growing in it, and fits our goals on the livestock quite a bit. It's also a good summer pasture. It's sure is. I noticed we're all around the shade, and our livestock will be too if they have the choice, you know, so we like to use that as part of our grazing rotation into it.
You think that, I noticed, you know, because I don't have a lot of trees, but along the edges where we do have trees, grass always grows. During the summer, we got that nice regrowth, and I wondered, you got mostly cool seasons in here, you don't get the same benefit.
I think Steve's right that you know, where you got that shade and you're making it a little cooler and you encourage those different plants. I can't remember which one was talked about the different plants and the layering. I think it was Elizabeth, that, you know, the trees, they're just another plant. You're getting the same layering effect. I think that, like you're saying, yeah. Also, you know, a lot of ours, in Steve's situation, I mean, he can tell me different, but those shady spots get a lot of nutrients added to them. If the cattle are allowed to go there in the summer, they're going to go there, and that's good to utilize that instead of just having a big mucky spot underneath those. But
Yeah, you better not have one tree.
that's right. Yeah.
Colt, now you're making me think of eastern gamma grass, because it's a C4 plant, if I'm correct.
Right.
But it seems like it has a little bit different season than some of our other warm seasons. So, have you used eastern gamma grass in some of your savannas?
Some of and we planted a bunch on a neighbor with eastern gamma grass. I'm curious how it does. I do know in seed production fields, it'll grow a little bit further up under the trees than than big blue stem, little blue stem per se. That will grow pretty well up to the base of the edge of the trees. I don't know how. Of course, we get into a lot of discussions around here amongst ourselves trying to figure this stuff out. And I think that when you put the big warm seasons in the woodlands where you have more shade, you need to give them a longer rest period because they're stressed a little bit from trying to see sunshine. They aren't growing in their primest environment, so they're a little easier to crowd out. Whereas rye, it's just tickled to grow in here. You know, this is as good. Tree doesn't put on leaves till it's about done, and it's just a real good environment for it to grow in. River oats is another one that really, and Elizabeth, where she's at, that's a C4 plant, isn't it? C3. So it is a cool season grass. We have a lot of arguments in the past about whether it's warm season or cool season. I guess we just solved it. They just hadn't told me yet. But it behaves a lot like that, and it also grows under shade real well. I wish we had more of it. We're getting more of it in production so we can put more of it in mixes. It's an incredible woodland plant. It's been hard for us to grow a lot.
So you said you're shooting for about 50% coverage in here?
50% or less, and that is percent of sunlight hitting the ground. So doesn't mean you need to reduce your trees by 50%. They overlap or they don't. it may be you need to remove more or less, but 50% sunshine seems to me to be kind of where you can get some pretty good forage regeneration on the ground. That's another argument we have around here, but 50 is what I like. And this here I would say is slightly above 50. And I know you guys don't have the best view looking this way, and I'm looking up behind you, but anybody wants to walk around or look up through there, I'd say most places you got a little bit more than 50. And you'll notice where we left 2 trees together and then they may have killed 10 in a row. Those bigger open clumps, the grass is a little taller, a little bit, growing a little bit better.
Yeah.
What was this before? It was woods?
This would have been woods, and it's a little hard to tell that hillside over there, and that's a different aspect and all, but it basically, the ground would have just been covered with leaves and wouldn't have been much vegetation. I mean, there's always remnant natives scattered, but it'd have been like just saying you could have thrown your square out here and more times not hit any plants.
And how long ago did you do this? I'm sorry.
We did this project 4 years ago.
So it took about 4 years for you to get this growth.
No, this is just where we're at in time. We grazed it quite a bit last year. I'd say it's 2 things. Well, one, we hand seeded it, and so humans tend to, we got wound up a little strippy where their seed didn't get the best coverage. So we've been trying to let it make a little seed and thicken itself up. That's more on us than it is on the planting. But it had a lot of growth in it like this last year. I'd say this is its best year so far, but probably look very similar to this last year.
The fire, what have you guys worked using fire enough that you find like you're zeroing in on what works best for this dynamic, and if so, what is it, and if not, how come?
Yes and no. Yes, we've used fire a lot, and we should know that. No, we haven't figured it out. I'm wondering if it won't be a lot like managing the diverse natives out here. Don't do the same thing over and over and over again. Mix it up, burn in the summer every now and then, especially on sprouts. That's a real effective method, summer burns. And that may suit the rye better versus winter burns. But we don't know that answer. We are trying to play with it. And in here, you're bound with, you can't get equipment around in here very well. So your blackberries and stuff, we're going to have to come up with those kind of, either we're going to have to control them through grazing or we're going to have to learn to control them through fire. And there's, to some extent, they're part of the system and they're quite palatable at certain times, especially after fire. They don't eat oak sprouts when they get real tall, but they sure do like to eat the ends of the leaves or the buds and the end of the twigs off.
And encourage the next generation of trees with fire and grazing.
Well, I'm more worried about getting too many of them. Our fire seldom kills all of the sprouts, so then as long as the tree lives once it's established, I'm more worried about converting back over to timber. And your blackberries and stuff may play a bigger part in that. Once they get started and they're easier to get established, there's not as much fuel load there. Gives a little oak tree a spot to start to grow without that. So we don't know. We haven't been doing this as long. We do have another site. Some of you was here last year. We were able to get on trailers and stuff and go back to another site. That one's been in for 20-some years, and it's got some regeneration, smaller trees in it, different ages, and we pretty well maintained it at that level. And you can always, if you are killing too much of your brush and you do want more regeneration, hold your fire off for a little longer between there. They do keep getting bigger, and also bushing out at the bottom makes them take up more sunlight on you, as do your shade. And they do, I don't know particularly what study it was, but they do go through bursts of growth. As you open it up, there's more sunlight for each tree. They go through a pretty healthy growth too.
How do you keep family involved
evolved long enough for some of this slow stuff to happen?
Well, I think you just got to make it intriguing to the kids, which has been a big problem in agriculture. You know, I'm just 35 years old, and my whole life in school you learned to work hard so you could get out of here. You know, go get you a job somewhere, get away from this low-income farming stuff. But we push a lot of our kids out of this, but that's probably a different story. One thing that this helped us do, we partnered with another guy, and that's the purpose of this drone seeder here. We used to do a lot of this by hand, 5-gallon buckets or bags, and just by hand stringing it out. And Mom really wants to do a lot of this. We've got hundreds of acres that we've already done and hundreds more that she'd like to do, and that is a good way to get your kids to leave. 5-gallon bucket. So that's where we come up with this. It's a drone spreader or aerial seeder, and we can fly over the top of these trees and sprinkle seed down on it like they used to do a lot more out of helicopters and whatnot. We're kind of trying to get a patent on that. We're patent pending on it. May start doing some services with it if people are interested in that. But it looks so small and you think you couldn't do much of anything with it. You can actually keep up with a broadcast seeder on the back of a tractor for acres for the day. Because with this you seed 20 miles an hour. It doesn't hold much seed. We can only take up about 10 pounds of seed, but our normal seeding rate's about 12 to 15 pounds. So, and you can dump that 10 pounds in 45 seconds. So it doesn't take you very long at all to seed. We've actually done probably over 400 acres with it. Another thing we've been doing with it is for corn, we can plant turnips and corn without ever driving out in the cornfield by spreading it over the top. And then when we harvest the corn, you've got your turnips, your cover crop coming on already.
How much flight time do you get out of one set of batteries?
About 15 minutes, which means you can do about 3 hoppers. If you've got 4 sets of batteries on chargers, a lot of times our setup's a generator in the back of a truck. If you got 4 sets of batteries charged, you can fly continuous without really ever having to wait on a charger. Our batteries for the seeder are actually inside of it, and they'll last for 2 days of heavy seeding without ever needing to be recharged. Yep, it's quite an interesting device. We've trying to get to market and make that usable. I think it'd have a lot of make this a lot more possible. Everybody hears questions there whether the girdled trees come from. A lot of times if you watch them, the little twigs on the end, they rot and fall off. Then you get the bigger ones, they fall down, you know, but they usually aren't that big. Finally the trunk topples, but we haven't had any livestock issues. Now, I ain't real bright, but I did decide to stand here instead of up there under that one that's leaning, because today could be the day. But yeah, we don't generally worry about it. Looking back, we maybe should have logged it. You do, just for your own establishment, I think you get quite a bit of good out of the disturbance of the logging as they drive around. Now some of it, when you got skidder ruts that deep, that's too much disturbance. But whenever they pull their log out or treetop out and they brush that ground, that actually creates a really good seed bed.
Do you all do much brush hogging at all?
On our pastures, we don't do, you hate to say any, but I'd say, you know, I can't think of the last time we did do a lot in seed production for different management things, but not on our pastures.
In the video description, there are links to other talks from this field day. Justin Thomas shares his thoughts about how nature works. Loren Steele discusses why a diversity of plants is good for livestock. Elizabeth talks about how a diversity of plants above ground makes for a productive grassland, as well as biochar's contribution to organic matter. Amy Hamilton looks below ground and speaks about how a diversity of root systems makes for a grassland that is stronger than a monoculture.